I stood in the doorway, hospital tag still clinging to my wrist, staring at the jewelry box she'd emptied while I was learning to walk again. The house smelled like lemon polish and theft. My daughter called it a misunderstanding. I called the bank, and that was the day I chose a new heir. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The front door opened with the groan of a hinge that hadn't moved in days. Pat stepped inside, her cane ticking softly against the hardwood floor. The air was stale with the quiet of a house left unlived. Sunlight angled in through the slats of the blinds, painting long gold stripes across the living room carpet like jail bars. Linda's voice floated in from the kitchen. "You're home early." Pat didn't answer. She was too focused on the smell, pine-scented cleaner, lemon polish, and something faintly metallic underneath. She paused just inside the entryway, adjusting her grip on the cane, letting the silence settle around her. Her movements were slower now, deliberate. 10 days in a hospital bed will do that to a person. She made her way down the hall, past the framed family photos that still hung where they always had. Pat and Joe in Maui, baby Joan in her arms, the three of them in matching sweatshirts at Lake George. She paused briefly, resting a hand on the wall. The plaster felt cool, anchoring. In the bedroom, sunlight draped the quilt like a memory. The bed was made. Her slippers were where she'd left them, but something felt off. A wrongness in the room, subtle but persistent, like a note slightly out of tune. Her eyes drifted to the top of the dresser. The jewelry box sat where it always had, oak with a tarnished brass clasp. A gift from her mother on her wedding day. But it was open, not wide, just slightly ajar. Enough to say someone had been inside and hadn't felt the need to hide it. Pat crossed the room and opened the lid fully. Her fingers hesitated an inch above it, as if expecting something to bite. Empty. The velvet-lined compartments that once held her life's quiet treasures, her mother's locket, the garnet ring Joe gave her their first Christmas, the pearl earrings from her 50th birthday, and her wedding band, were all gone, not misplaced, gone. Pat stood there for a long moment, letting the emptiness speak for itself. Behind her, the floor creaked. "I figured you wouldn't want all that old stuff anymore," Linda said from the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms folded, her tone breezy and unbothered. "Most of it was junk. I mean, it looked ancient. I thought maybe I'd get you something fresh, a little upgrade." Pat turned slowly, her eyes settling on Linda's face like cold wind on glass. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just let the silence do what words couldn't. Linda gave a little laugh, uncomfortable. "I was gonna tell you. I didn't know when." Still, Pat said nothing. The space between them thickened, charged with something neither of them could name. A small muscle twitched at the corner of Linda's mouth. She looked away first. Pat moved to the small writing desk in the corner. She slid open the drawer and pulled out a thin, black-bound ledger. Its pages were cream-colored and clean, except for the occasional neat line of cursive and navy ink. She sat down, flipped to the next blank page, and carefully wrote the date in the top right corner. October 9th. Then, in quiet, steady strokes, mother's locket, gold garnet ring. Pearl earrings, wedding band, gold engraved. She underlined the last one twice, then closed the ledger and placed it back in the drawer, as if tucking away a sealed decision. Joan's voice called from down the hall. "I told you." She appeared a moment later, arms crossed, jaw tight. Her eyes scanned the empty box, then flicked to Linda. 10 days, that's all it took for her to price you." Linda rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic." Joan stepped forward, her boots thudding against the wood like punctuation. "You had no right." Pat's hand rose slightly, an old gesture, enough to make Joan stop talking. Then, almost gently, Pat said, "Can you bring in my suitcase?" Joan hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." She left the room. Linda lingered in the doorway. "It was just jewelry, Pat. I'll buy you something better." Pat's eyes met hers again, unflinching, quiet as a blade. "That won't be necessary," she said. Her voice was soft, but final. Linda stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked away. Pat listened to her footsteps retreat down the hall. She waited until the house fell quiet again. then reached for the small wooden box tucked behind the dresser, the one even Linda didn't know existed. She slid it out slowly. Inside, a single brass key. Her fingers closed around it, and for the first time in days, Pat smiled. The morning light burned silver through the kitchen window, illuminating every speck of dust on the marble counter. Pat sat at the edge of the breakfast nook, a fresh legal pad in front of her and the bank's customer service line on speaker. She had the receiver angled slightly away from her hearing aid, but her focus was sharp. Eyes narrowed, pen poised, she listened. "I understand, Mrs. Sutton. You're requesting electronic transaction records from October 1st through October 9. "Correct," she said. Her voice was calm, crisp. "Checking and savings. I need deposit details and originating accounts. And no summaries. I want the itemized ledger." The line went silent for a second. Keyboard clicks in the background, faint hold music on loop, until the woman returned. "Yes, ma'am. You'll receive a secure link by email in the next hour. Anything else I can help with today?" Pat smiled slightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. Not yet. She ended the call. The kitchen clock ticked steadily behind her. Outside, leaves shuffled along the driveway like whispers too tired to speak. She sat there for a long while, not moving, just staring at the empty space in the fruit bowl where she used to keep her ring while baking. An hour later, her email chimed. Pat slid her laptop open with a quiet precision, like a safecracker. The PDF blinked into view, column after column of deposits, transfers, and routine payments. Then she saw it. October 5th, direct transfer. Columbus Gold Exchange, LLC, $3,200. The name rang in her bones. She opened Linda's email account on the family desktop, an account Linda never remembered to log out of. Pat had seen the notification a day earlier, buried between promotional spam and an Amazon receipt. A line item from Nationwide Credit Union incoming. $3,200. Mobile deposit. Pat's ledger sat open beside her. She added one more line under the list of missing items. CGX deposit, traced. Behind her, footsteps padded across the tile. Emma, in socks and pajamas, peered around the corner with a carton of chocolate milk in her hands. "Grandma," she said, eyes half-lidded. "What you doing?" Pat minimized the screen, but not fast enough. Emma blinked at the word deposit in bold letters. "Mom said your jewelry was worthless," she offered, completely unbothered. "She said it was fake, just, sentimental." Pat turned. Her face didn't move, but her eyes smiled, sharp and glittering. "Then it'll buy her nothing," she said softly. Emma took a sip of milk, then wandered off, oblivious. A few hours later, Joan's Ford Fusion pulled into the driveway. Pat was already waiting by the door, her coat on and her small leather purse tucked under her arm. Joan didn't need to ask where they were going. She just nodded, helped her mother down the front steps, and pulled the car door shut behind her. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full, coiled like something just beneath the surface. "Linda took it to Columbus Gold Exchange," Pat said finally. Joan gripped the wheel tighter. "Of course she did. Have you been there before?" "Yeah," Joan said. "Once, years ago. Place looks like a DMV threw up in a strip mall." It did. The sign out front was missing 3 letters. The windows were covered in sun-bleached posters boasting top dollar for your gold. "And we buy estates. No questions asked." Inside, it smelled like metal filings and stale coffee. A bell jingled as they entered. A balding man behind the counter looked up from a receipt tape. "Help you, ladies?" Pat leaned her cane against the counter. "I'd like to see your records for October 5th. Jewelry brought in by a Linda Carpenter." He raised an eyebrow. "We don't usually release." Joan stepped forward. Her voice was low, steady. "That's my sister. She used my mother's property to get a cash payout. We can either get what we need now, or you can speak to our attorney." The man hesitated. Then, with a sigh, he pulled out a binder. "Hang on." He flipped pages while Pat stood absolutely still. Her eyes stayed locked on his every motion, as if willing the truth to surface. Finally, he slid the paper across the glass. October 5th. Client name, Linda Carpenter. Items, gold locket, garnet ring, pearl earrings, wedding band. Engraved inside band, "Always J." Payout, $3,200 signature line. A curling, unmistakable Linda C. Pat didn't flinch, didn't sigh. She simply reached into her purse and retrieved her phone. Joan glanced at her. "What are you doing?" Pat's eyes never left the signature. "Setting a meeting." The brass bell above the pawnshop door jangled again as Pat stepped back inside, this time alone. Joan had offered to come with her, even started the engine. But Pat had waved her off. "This one's mine," she'd said, in that same unshakable voice she'd used to dismiss Linda. The man behind the counter looked up, recognition flickering in his eyes. "You're back." "I'd like to redeem one of the items listed under Linda Carpenter," Pat said. "The engraved wedding band." He scratched his jaw, eyeing her like she might be a problem. "You got proof it was yours?" Pat unzipped her purse with deliberate care. First came her driver's license, then from a worn manila envelope. She unfolded a copy of her marriage certificate, creased from age, edges softened from decades in storage. The man took them, checked the name. Then he glanced again at the signature on the pawn slip. The dates matched. So did the initials engraved in the ring. "I'll need a redemption fee," he muttered. $350 flat. No taxes, cash only. Pat didn't flinch. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a slim, navy billfold. No hesitation, no questions. She counted out the bills with steady fingers and laid them on the counter. The man disappeared into the back, and for a long minute, Pat stood in the hush of buzzing fluorescence and faint classic rock bleeding from the ceiling speaker. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass display case. Smaller now, maybe, but not broken. Just sharpened down to essentials. He returned with a small gray envelope. Inside was the ring. It caught the light like it had when Jo first slipped it on her finger in the courthouse, decades ago. The engraving inside was still there, still hers. Always J. She took it in her palm and closed her fingers around it slowly, like pressing a memory back into place. "I'll also need the original pawn slip," she said. The man raised an eyebrow. "That's not—" She met his gaze squarely. "It's evidence now." Something in her tone left no room for negotiation. He pulled a copy from the binder and slid it across the glass. Pat folded it carefully and tucked it back into her purse. No ceremony, just business. Outside, Joan's Fusion had reappeared in the lot. Emma sat in the back seat, scrolling through her phone, but looked up as Pat approached. She opened the door before Pat even reached the car. "You got it?" she asked. Pat nodded and held up the envelope. Emma tilted her phone. "Want me to document it?" Pat blinked at her, surprised, then softly pleased. Yes. They stood by the car, sunlight washing over the pavement, while Emma snapped a series of photos of the marriage certificate, the pawn receipt, Pat's ID, and the envelope with the jewelry shop's name printed in faded gold foil. "Got it," Emma said. Saved it in a folder marked Evidence, Mom's Screw-Up. "Want me to email it to you?" Pat smiled. "Not yet. Just back it up, twice." Joan leaned against the hood, arms folded, watching the whole thing. "You should frame that receipt," she said. "Put it next to your wedding photo, the one in the blue frame, just to remind her." Pat didn't answer. She reached into the envelope and slid the ring out. Then she opened the side pocket of her purse and pulled out a brand new velvet pouch. Deep forest green. Purchased quietly on Etsy 2 nights earlier. She slipped the ring inside, pulled the drawstring closed, and pressed the soft fabric flat against her chest. Joan opened the passenger door for her. "Ready?" Pat nodded. "Let's go." As the car pulled out of the lot, the sun glinted off the windshield, and the Columbus Gold Exchange receded in the rearview mirror like a chapter she'd written and filed away. Back home, Linda's SUV wasn't in the driveway. Emma glanced at her phone and frowned. "She Venmo'd me $25 to pick up Ty. Said she'd be back in an hour." Pat raised an eyebrow. "Good." Joan turned off the ignition. "Why?" Pat looked at her, calm and clear. "Because I need 15 minutes alone in the study." The study smelled like old ink and furniture polish. Dust motes drifted lazily through the afternoon light, catching on the edge of Jo's old desk like ghosts that had waited patiently for her return. Pat closed the door behind her with a quiet click. She locked it. Then she sat, The chair creaked under her as she reached for the laptop. Hers, not the house's shared desktop. It had lived in the cabinet behind the books for years, untouched since Joe's funeral. She plugged it in, watched it blink to life, and opened the small notebook she'd started keeping in the hospital. Each page was precise, tidy, sequential. She began with the bank. The homepage loaded slowly. She opened her Navy billfold and read off the account number she'd committed to memory in 1994. New password. 21 characters. Upper and lowercase, numbers, symbol. Written by hand, not saved in the browser. Next, savings, brokerage, insurance. Each one clicked over to her full control, with the soundless satisfaction of tumblers falling into place. She opened a new email account, one unlinked to the family name. The inbox greeted her like a clean slate. From her purse, she retrieved the small brass key, the one she'd taken from the box behind the dresser, and opened the drawer of Joe's filing cabinet. Inside were envelopes marked insurance, hospital, and mortgage. She pulled them all. A phone call later, billing was rerouted from Linda's shared account to Pat's new private one. No third-party involvement, she said to the woman at County General's admin office. From now on, statements come to me directly, email or post, the woman confirmed. You'll receive full access. Expect your next invoice within the week. Pat thanked her and ended the call. It was almost soothing, the act of reclaiming. Like stitching yourself back into your own skin, thread by steady thread. The last item was the mailbox. She slid the keyring off her wrist and attached a second one, a key Joan had made earlier that morning. Pat had already filled out the postal forwarding paperwork. Starting Monday, all mail would go to the small rented box 2 towns over. No more Linda sifting through her medical statements or policy letters. No more mysteriously missing envelopes. Her phone buzzed. Linda, 1:17 p.m. Stop making this hard. We were helping. You're not thinking clearly. Pat stared at the screen. Another message came. Mom, you're creating drama where there doesn't have to be any. I was trying to protect your dignity. That jewelry was embarrassing. You're lucky I got anything for it. Another. This isn't you. You've always been fair. You're acting like I'm some kind of criminal. She tapped print. The printer on the lower shelf whirred to life. Paper fed out warm, ink still wet. Each sheet held every word. Pat slid them into a manila folder labeled in sharp black marker. Linda, comms, October. Joan knocked once and entered without waiting. You good? She asked, eyeing the papers on the desk. Need anything? Pat looked up. A hole punch. Joan grinned. You're archiving now? I'm documenting, Pat said, flipping the folder closed. In case she starts rewriting history. Joan crossed the room and picked up one of the freshly printed pages. Her eyes skimmed the lines. Jesus, she set the paper down. You know what this is, she said, a little softer. You're building a museum of greed. Pat didn't smile, but her eyes crinkled. I want her to tour it, she said. Every room, every lie. Joan watched her mother for a beat longer, then reached into the drawer and handed her the hole punch. Pat added it to the stack. Clean, even holes. Every page precise. She had just slipped the latest message into a binder, green like the velvet pouch, when the printer spat out one last sheet. Another text. Emma told me you're printing everything. That's petty, Mom. You're just trying to turn everyone against me. Joan read over her shoulder. Well, she said, that confirms it. Pat didn't respond. She simply pressed the final page into the folder and clicked it closed. A low rumble sounded from outside, the crunch of tires in gravel. Joan walked to the window and tilted the blinds. She's back. Pat didn't move. She reached into the drawer again and pulled out a fresh envelope. Blank. Sealed. No markings. She slid it under the stack of folders and turned toward the door. Let her knock, Pat said, voice cool and level. She won't be the first. The door to Henderson Wealth and Trust clicked shut behind them with a soft pneumatic sigh. The building was newer than Pat expected. Glass walls, polished stone floors, and seating that looked more like an art exhibit than a waiting area. But the name on the door still carried weight. Old weight. Joe had known Robert Henderson's father. They'd played golf twice a year and never once talked politics. Now it was Robert who rose from behind the desk, all salt and pepper polish and quiet authority. "Mrs. Sutton," he said, coming around to shake her hand. "You're early." "I don't like waiting," Pat replied, settling into the leather chair opposite his desk, especially not when it comes to money. Joan remained standing, arms crossed, not intervening. She knew better than to interrupt the ritual Pat was about to conduct. Robert opened a navy folder with gold foil lettering. "I reviewed everything you sent over. You're looking to open a new investment account. No cosigner, no oversight." "That's right." "And no disbursements to family?" Pat's eyes never left his. "Not unless they qualify by behavior." Robert gave a small, surprised smile. "We don't have a checkbox for that, but we'll do our best." He turned the page. "Your primary beneficiary?" Pat paused for the first time, then reached into her purse and handed him a sticky note, folded once. He opened it. "Emma Caroline Sutton." Robert raised his eyebrows. "Your granddaughter," Pat nodded. "The only one who hasn't stolen from me or lied to my face." Joan blinked, startled, both by the clarity of the moment and the lack of bitterness in Pat's tone. It wasn't cruelty. It was just truth, laid out like good arithmetic. Robert wrote Emma's name into the beneficiary field. "No Linda Carpenter on file," he confirmed. "Remove her from anything Joe and I ever touched," Pat said. "She sold her name the day she sold my ring." He made a notation, flipped to the next section. "And the Henderson Education Fund?" he asked. "That's the second part of this?" Pat leaned back slightly in her chair. "Yes. I want 20% of this account's quarterly yield transferred directly into a fund supporting local foster kids aging out of care. Tuition, housing, food stipends, and I want it kept local, Franklin and Licking counties only." Robert blinked. "You don't want your name on it?" "No," Pat said. "I want it on the checks, not the building. And I want that money locked. No one touches it but the recipients." "You're creating a grant program," Robert said slowly. "That's legacy money." Pat smiled for the first time that day, not the soft smile she used for Emma or the tight-lipped ones she gave Linda. This one had iron in it. "They sold love by the ounce," she said. "I'm buying integrity by the year." Joan exhaled, half a laugh, half a sigh. Robert nodded with genuine admiration. "Every cent will move beyond their reach," he said. "Good," Pat replied. "And I'd like everything notarized and filed today." He hesitated. "That's a tall order." "But not impossible." He rose and disappeared down the hall with the folder in hand. Pat sat quietly, watching the cityscape beyond the window. Columbus spread out below them, wide streets, blinking walk signs, late commuters tapping their brakes in the turning lane. A city filled with stories, some crooked, some still waiting for a clean page. Joan finally spoke. "Emma's going to lose it when she finds out, in a good way." "She won't find out," Pat said. "Not until she needs it." Joan nodded. "And Linda?" Pat turned her head slowly toward her daughter. "She'll feel it before she sees it." Robert returned 15 minutes later with a notary in tow, a compact woman with sharp glasses and a quiet efficiency. The paperwork was initialed, signed, witnessed, sealed. Joan watched every stroke of ink like a ceremony. When it was over, Robert slid a single sheet across the desk. "Confirmation of ownership, the account's live." Pat took it, folded it neatly, slipped it into the green velvet pouch. She stood. Before they left, Robert stopped her with a curious glance. "Do you mind if I ask what changed?" he said. "You and Joe had everything jointly held for decades." Pat's gaze didn't waver. "I was protecting what we built," she said. "Now I'm protecting what they never will." The phone call came at 6:42 a.m. Pat knew it would. Her landline rang with that old, stubborn buzz that sounded like it still belonged in a time when things were built to last. She sat at the kitchen table, stirring cream into her coffee, not bothering to look at the caller ID. She let it ring once more, then answered. "Mom? What the hell is this?" Linda's voice exploded through the receiver. Ragged and high-pitched. No greeting, just fury. "You can't cut your own daughter out." Pat didn't flinch. "I just did. Legally, quietly, permanently." A beat of silence, sharp and stunned, hung in the space between them. "You've lost your mind," Linda's voice cracked. "This is elder abuse. I'm calling an attorney. I'm filing something. You think I won't?" Pat took a slow sip of her coffee. You already did. Robert forwarded the certified documents to your attorney an hour ago. Another silence. Then a low, hateful hiss. You conniving bitch. Pat hung up. She didn't slam the receiver, didn't raise her voice, didn't explain. Some endings didn't need music cues, just clean cuts. Emma was in her kitchen, barefoot, pouring milk into her cereal when the text came through. Linda, Mom, call me, now, emergency. Your grandmother's lost it. She stared at it for 3 seconds, then opened her phone settings and hit block caller. No ceremony, no second guess. She scrolled up, deleted the thread. The entire conversation history vanished with a single tap. No need to archive what had never been honest. Outside, a garbage truck groaned down the street. Emma opened the window and tossed the burner phone into the can below without a word. Joan stood beside her mother at the drive-through window of the bank, the old green velvet pouch cradled carefully in Pat's lap. The manager had opened early for them, quietly, professionally, and without questions. Pat passed over the certified check. Joan watched the teller's eyebrows lift behind the glass, but to her credit, she said nothing. One deposit, Pat said, to the new account ending in 2204. The woman nodded and reached for the slip. As Pat initialed every line on the deposit form, Joan leaned against the counter and exhaled through her nose. You know what I realized, she said quietly. Pat didn't look up. Peace has paperwork. A thin smile flickered across Pat's face. So does war. She handed over the final sheet. Later that morning, in a gray corner office 3 blocks from the courthouse, Robert Henderson stood in front of a sleek printer as the last few pages of Linda's disinheritance packet rolled into the tray. His assistant, a brisk young man named Derek, collected them and placed the stack into a firm-sided envelope stamped with certified priority shipping. Delivery confirmation? Robert asked without turning. Signature required, Derek replied. Robert nodded. Make sure it goes out today. Already scheduled, Derek said. And? Sir? Robert looked at him. I've seen a lot of trust restructures, Derek said. But this one's surgical. Robert's face gave nothing away. It's clean. That's what she asked for. Linda's front door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames in the hallway. She tore open the envelope with a knife, slicing through paper and edge alike. Her lawyer's name was stamped on the top, the words she never thought she'd see. Irrevocable, removed. Beneficiary rights nullified, burned through the center like poison. Her hands shook. Her mouth opened to curse, but no sound came. She stumbled backward, bumping into the hallway table. A picture frame fell face down. Linda sank to the floor, eyes wide, breath coming in small, furious gasps. She wasn't gone, but she'd been erased. Pat stood on the sidewalk in front of a small brick building on East Broad, a few blocks from the old shelter where she and Joe used to volunteer when he was still strong enough to drive at night. The morning sun cast long amber stripes across the pavement. Her shadow stretched toward the glass door that bore the name in clean white vinyl, Franklin Futures Scholarship Fund. She didn't go inside. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a letter, handwritten, sealed in a white envelope, addressed to Emma. No return address, no stamp. She slipped it into the building's mail slot and stepped back. Inside that envelope was more than instructions. It was more than a key to a financial future. It was a map. One Emma wouldn't know she had until the right moment. Pat turned away, hands in her coat pockets, and began walking toward the bus stop. The wind picked up behind her, and 1/2 a mile away, Linda picked up her phone to make one last call. To someone she'd sworn she'd never speak to again. It showed up just after 8 a.m., slinking onto the neighborhood Facebook group like an oil slick on clean pavement. Linda Carpenter. Some of you know me as Joe and Pat Sutton's daughter. This morning, I found out my own mother, at the urging of certain manipulative family members, has rewritten her will and estate, cutting me out entirely. After a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and care, I've been discarded like trash. If you still believe in decency, or even just fairness, I'd appreciate your prayers, or your truth. It had emojis, it had flair. It had just enough misdirection to sound like heartbreak instead of strategy. Pat read it twice on Joan's iPad, lips tight, hands steady. Then she pressed the side buttons and took a screenshot. "Send that to Robert," she said. Joan did, with a subject line that read simply, "For the record." In his office above Easttown, Robert Henderson added the image to the digital estate file, typing one additional note into the record: attempted manipulation of public narrative, logged for future litigation prep if needed. He didn't like drama, but he respected precision, and Pat Sutton had come to him not for a performance, but for a perimeter. His inbox chimed a moment later. A reply from Emma. Subject: Re. That Facebook post body. Some people earn family by choice, others just inherit names. Robert smiled to himself. He liked Emma. She reminded him of someone. Not Pat, not Joan either. Someone younger. Someone dangerous in the right kind of way. Linda refreshed the page like a gambler pulling a rigged slot handle. At first, a few hearts appeared. One praying hands. A sad face from someone she barely knew from church. But then came the comments. Marta R. Pat Sutton gave my son his first job at the library when no one else would. I don't believe this story. Greg T. Didn't I see you trying to sell her silverware on Marketplace last year? Denise P. This is family business. Posting it here makes it feel off. Steve W. I worked with your dad at the water plant. He always said Pat was the smart one. Linda's eyes burned. One comment hit harder than the rest. Emma Sutton replied, "Some people earn family by choice." It had 47 likes in under an hour. Linda didn't just delete the post. She unpublished her entire profile. Then she threw her phone across the living room. It cracked against the arm of the couch, not broken, but scarred. The pawn shop smelled like ammonia and regret. Industrial cleaner over old carpet. The counter buzzed under a yellowing fluorescent bulb. The manager, a man named Kelvin with tattooed knuckles and a posture like he was permanently bracing for an insult, handed over the form. Notarized affidavit of sale, he said. Dated March 18th. Pearl ring, gold inlay, vintage. Sold by Linda Carpenter for $180. Joan held the paper up to the light and whistled. She sold a family heirloom for less than the price of a pair of running shoes. Kelvin shrugged. She haggled down, if you can believe it. Wasn't worth what it meant, Joan murmured. Kelvin pointed to the signature line. She said it was hers. I asked for ID. She gave me the story about how it was her mom's, but she had permission. Did she? Joan asked. He smirked. Lady, I don't run a lie detector. I run a register. Joan folded the affidavit and slid it into a thick envelope marked for Robert Henderson. That's Exhibit A, she said, in pearls. Back at Pat's kitchen table, the original velvet ring box sat open, now empty. Its satin lining pressed and pale like a ghost's mouth. Joan placed the affidavit beside it. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Pat stood. I'd like to go to the garden center, she said. Emma's birthday is next week. Joan blinked. You think she'll want plants? I think she'll want proof something's still growing, Pat said. As they stepped outside, a car down the street idled longer than it should have. Linda sat behind the wheel, sunglasses on. Lip-bitten raw, watching her mother and sister walk into the sunlight with something she could no longer fake. Dignity. She dialed again, and this time, the person on the other end picked up. The precinct smelled like scorched coffee and printer toner. Not a place for pageantry, just process. Pat sat with her purse on her lap in interview room B. No cuffs, no mirrored glass, no drama. Just 2 chairs, a table, and a small black recorder blinking red in the corner. Detective Marissa Klein stepped in with a tablet tucked under her arm and the quiet posture of someone used to people lying by instinct. Her badge clipped to her belt, understated. Her voice, steady. You brought a lot, she said, nodding at the folder. I brought enough, Pat replied. She opened the leather binder, an old one of Joe's from his pension board days. Inside, a clean chronological packet. First, the printed ledger from Henderson Wealth, listing all estate assets pre- and post-transaction. Second, receipts. One for the original appraisal of the ring in '96. One for the missing piece from the insurance inventory 6 months after Joe died. And the third from the pawn shop in Linda's name. Third, screenshots of texts. Linda begging for a short-term loan, dated 2 weeks before the sale. Pat's clear refusal, followed by, "I'll figure it out myself then. Don't say I didn't ask." And finally, the notarized affidavit from Kelvin. Marissa flipped through the packet, her brows knitting closer together with each page. When she reached the affidavit, she tapped her nail against the signature. "This is clean," she said. "Affidavit, corroborating records. Item over 5,000 by appraised value. This is felony theft of property." She slid the folder closer to herself. "I'll file the report and fast-track it. This isn't petty larceny. It's calculated misappropriation of estate property. She never had legal possession." Pat nodded once. "No press," she said quietly. "No media. Just process." "You'll get a case number by the end of the day," Marissa said, standing. "And a summons will go out within the week." Linda stared at the certified letter on her dining room table like it might detonate. The words "summons for interview and preliminary inquiry" were stamped at the top in red. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Not after the post blew up in her face. Not after her Facebook was flooded with comments she never imagined would take Pat's side. Now she just sat there, cold, mouth dry. Fury calcified into something meaner. "Just a conversation," her husband Tom said from across the table, voice tight. "You'll answer a few questions, that's all. You didn't steal anything, you sold it. For the family." She looked at him like he'd grown gills. "It wasn't mine to sell." "Then we explain it was a misunderstanding," he tried. "We say you were under stress. You panicked. Say you thought you had permission." Linda snorted. "They're not buying confusion, Tom. They're filing charges." He reached for her hand. She didn't offer it. Then he stood. "I'm going over there," he said. Pat answered the door like she'd been expecting the knock. Tom stood on the porch in his wrinkled Ohio State hoodie and loafers that didn't match the season. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked like he hadn't slept since the summons arrived. "Can we talk?" he asked. Pat stepped aside without a word. He didn't sit, just hovered in the middle of the room, arms crossed, as if bracing for a windstorm. "She's not well," he said. "Not balanced. Not since Joe passed. You know that. You've seen her spiral. Can't you just—" he faltered. "Withdraw the report?" Pat's gaze didn't soften. "You think grief is an alibi?" she said. "It's not. It's motive." Tom shook his head, his voice fraying. "She's your daughter." Pat's eyes never left his. "No, she was my responsibility, and she turned that into a weapon." Silence. Joan emerged from the hallway with a manila folder. "Here," she said to her mother, ignoring Tom completely. "Just got this back from the bank. Documented transfers. Linda's withdrawals started 3 months before Dad's funeral." Tom swallowed hard. Joan tilted her head at him. "She's learning interest isn't free." He didn't argue, didn't blink. He just turned and walked out. Back at the precinct, Detective Klein opened the Sutton folder again. She logged the affidavit, printed out the messaging screenshots, and began assembling the probable cause report. Her screen filled with dates, amounts, and digital threads. A felony count, a civil complaint pending, and now a formal witness request. She clicked send. Halfway across the city, Linda's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't her mother. It was a restricted number, and it was only the beginning. The courtroom was hotter than it should have been for October. Cheap vents rattled in the ceiling like they were gasping for air, but the room stayed close and stale. People packed into every row, pressed shoulder to shoulder with half-curious, half-judgmental stares. Local interest had bloomed overnight. A Sutton estate case? The pearl ring? The Facebook post? It had gone small-town viral. Joan sat with Emma on the left side of the gallery, a navy folder open in her lap. Emma's face was composed but unreadable, jaw set, hands clasped tight, like she'd taped the whole day into her memory already. Linda sat across the aisle, flanked by her attorney and a cloud of tension thick enough to choke on. Her makeup looked like war paint. Too sharp, too much. Tom was missing. Pat took her seat at the plaintiff's table without assistance, handbag placed gently at her feet, spine straight. She didn't glance toward Linda. She didn't need to. The silence between them had become its own language. Robert Henderson adjusted his cufflinks and rose. "Your Honor," he said with a calm that didn't flinch, We present the motion to proceed with criminal charges on felony theft of non-dispersed estate assets, supported by notarized sale documentation, digital correspondence, and corroborated testimony. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with a brisk voice and low tolerance for drama, nodded. Proceed. Robert handed over the evidence packet, like he was placing a chess piece on a board. Neatly, deliberately. Exhibit A, he said. Notarized affidavit from the shop where the item was sold, identifying Ms. Carpenter by legal name and state ID. Exhibit B, a chronological record of text messages from Ms. Carpenter acknowledging intent, paired with the refusal of consent from Mrs. Sutton. And Exhibit C. He tapped the folder. A time-stamped sales receipt for the heirloom ring. Appraised at over $6,400, sold for $180. Without ownership, without permission, while the estate remained jointly filed and unaltered. The judge skimmed the pages quickly, eyebrows rising just slightly at the price differential. Linda's lawyer rose. Your Honor, we move to dismiss. We believe the situation was a familial misunderstanding, not criminal intent. Furthermore, Robert cut in, his tone still cool. Intent doesn't require confession, it requires pattern. We have pattern. The judge raised her hand. Let's hear the witness. Emma stood. She walked to the front with unhurried confidence, no wobble, no nerves. She swore in, met the judge's eyes, then turned toward the room. I was present during a gathering at my mom's house in early spring, she began, voice steady. There were 3 women over, friends of hers. They were having wine, laughing. At one point, I heard my mom say, I didn't wait 30 years just to let that ring go to some soft granddaughter. It's mine now. I made sure of it. Linda's face contorted. Her lawyer whispered something urgent. Emma didn't pause. I remember because I'd never heard her sound that triumphant, like she'd finally taken something back. It didn't feel like grief. It felt like victory. Robert stepped beside her, addressing the bench. The witness provided the statement voluntarily. No compensation, no coaching. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Carpenter, do you dispute this statement? Linda stood, lips drawn thin. I dispute the context, she snapped. She misheard. It was a private conversation. The judge shook her head slowly. If it was private, you should have had it without guests in the next room. She turned to the clerk. This court finds sufficient cause to proceed with formal charges. The motion to dismiss is denied. The matter will advance to a full evidentiary hearing. Gasps bloomed across the gallery like a slow ripple. Someone dropped a pen. A phone buzzed. Linda sat back down, hard. Robert nodded once and began packing the documents. Outside, by noon, the Franklin Courier had already posted the headline, Retiree Outsmarts Family Fraud. Sutton Matriarch Wins First Round in Heirloom Case. A photo showed Pat exiting the courthouse, chin high, sunglasses on, Joan beside her, hand light on her arm. Reporters shouted questions. Pat didn't flinch. She walked right through the noise, calm as glass. At the corner, a black SUV idled, windows tinted. Inside, someone watched. Not Linda, not Tom, someone older, worse. And they just put the car in gear. The courtroom was hotter than it should have been for October. Cheap vents rattled in the ceiling like they were gasping for air, but the room stayed close and stale. People packed into every row, pressed shoulder to shoulder with half-curious, half-judgmental stares. Local interest had bloomed overnight. A Sutton estate case? The pearl ring? The Facebook post? It had gone small-town viral. Joan sat with Emma on the left side of the gallery, a navy folder open in her lap. Emma's face was composed but unreadable, jaw set, hands clasped tight, like she'd taped the whole day into her memory already. Linda sat across the aisle, flanked by her attorney and a cloud of tension thick enough to choke on. Her makeup looked like war paint, too sharp, too much. Tom was missing. Pat took her seat at the plaintiff's table without assistance, handbag placed gently at her feet, spine straight. She didn't glance toward Linda. She didn't need to. The silence between them had become its own language. Robert Henderson adjusted his cufflinks and rose. Your Honor, he said with a calm that didn't flinch. We present the motion to proceed with criminal charges on felony theft of non-dispersed estate assets. supported by notarized sale documentation, digital correspondence, and corroborated testimony. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with a brisk voice and low tolerance for drama, nodded. Proceed. Robert handed over the evidence packet, like he was placing a chess piece on a board. Neatly, deliberately. Exhibit A, he said. Notarized affidavit from the shop where the item was sold, identifying Ms. Carpenter by legal name and state ID. Exhibit B, a chronological record of text messages from Ms. Carpenter acknowledging intent, paired with the refusal of consent from Mrs. Sutton, and Exhibit C. He tapped the folder. A time-stamped sales receipt for the heirloom ring, appraised at over $6,400, sold for $180 without ownership. Without permission, while the estate remained jointly filed and unaltered, the judge skimmed the pages quickly, eyebrows rising just slightly at the price differential. Linda's lawyer rose. Your Honor, we move to dismiss. We believe the situation was a familial misunderstanding, not criminal intent. Furthermore, Robert cut in, his tone still cool. Intent doesn't require confession. It requires pattern. We have pattern. The judge raised her hand. Let's hear the witness. Emma stood. She walked to the front with unhurried confidence. No wobble, no nerves. She swore in, met the judge's eyes, then turned toward the room. I was present during a gathering at my mom's house in early spring, she began, voice steady. There were 3 women over, friends of hers. They were having wine, laughing. At one point, I heard my mom say, I didn't wait 30 years just to let that ring go to some soft granddaughter. It's mine now. I made sure of it. Linda's face contorted. Her lawyer whispered something urgent. Emma didn't pause. I remember because I'd never heard her sound that triumphant, like she'd finally taken something back. It didn't feel like grief. It felt like victory. Robert stepped beside her, addressing the bench. The witness provided this statement voluntarily. No compensation, no coaching. The judge leaned forward. Miss Carpenter, do you dispute this statement? Linda stood, lips drawn thin. I dispute the context, she snapped. She misheard. It was a private conversation. The judge shook her head slowly. If it was private, you should have had it without guests in the next room. She turned to the clerk. This court finds sufficient cause to proceed with formal charges. The motion to dismiss is denied. The matter will advance to a full evidentiary hearing. Gasps bloomed across the gallery like a slow ripple. Someone dropped a pen. A phone buzzed. Linda sat back down hard. Robert nodded once and began packing the documents. Outside, by noon, the Franklin Courier had already posted the headline. Retiree outsmarts family fraud. Sutton matriarch wins first round in heirloom case. A photo showed Pat exiting the courthouse. Chin high, sunglasses on, Joan beside her, hand light on her arm. Reporters shouted questions. Pat didn't flinch. She walked right through the noise, calm as glass. At the corner, a black SUV idled, windows tinted. Inside, someone watched. Not Linda, not Tom, someone older. Worse. And they just put the car in gear. The email from the bank came through at 7:03 a.m., with the kind of tone only legal compliance teams could manage. Polite, final, and quietly devastating. Subject, account action confirmation. Joint line suspended body. Dear Mrs. Sutton, per your request. The legacy joint credit line attached to account ending in 0311 has been formally suspended. All linked cards have been deactivated. Activity flagged for review. No further charges permitted. Thank you for banking with us. Pat closed the message with one click. She didn't smile, but her coffee tasted less bitter that morning. 3 miles away, Linda stood at the self-checkout kiosk of Marvin's Grocery, a frozen bag of shrimp sweating through the paper liner. Her card beeped, then beeped again, then flashed red, declined, contact issuer. What? She muttered, sliding it again. Harder this time. The machine blinked like it was annoyed. The teen behind the cigarette counter stared with mild pity. Ma'am, he said. You got another one? Linda yanked open her purse and pulled out her debit card. Same result. Another decline. Another blinking red denial. The machine might as well have spit the shrimp back at her. She stared at the screen, stomach flipping. She wasn't broke. Was she? She was halfway to a breakdown when a familiar voice broke the silence. You done pretending yet? Tom stood at the end of the aisle, arms crossed, looking like he hadn't come for groceries. Just answers. Linda blinked, startled. What are you doing here? He nodded at the screen. Same as you, apparently, watching your reality bounce. I don't know why it's doing that, she said, fumbling. It's a bank error. No, he said, stepping closer. It's a freeze, a lock, a consequence. You drained her, and now she's done letting you. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough, Tom said. You used your mother like an ATM, and when she stopped dispensing, you filed a pity post and hoped someone else would cough up sympathy. Linda opened her mouth, but nothing came. Tom stared at the bags of unpaid groceries on the scanner. Then he looked at her one last time. We can't afford the version of you that keeps cashing out people's trust, he said. Figure it out. Then he walked out. No cart, no groceries, just gone. That night, Emma dragged 2 suitcases up Pat's porch steps. No drama. Just quiet steps and a worn Ohio State hoodie that smelled like borrowed courage. Pat opened the door before she could knock. Your room's still yours, she said simply. Emma exhaled. I'll try not to hog the washer. They didn't hug, they didn't cry. But when Pat handed her a folded stack of towels and said, We're a no-questions household after 9 p.m., Emma nodded like she'd just heard something sacred. Down the hall, Joan poured tea and set an extra mug on the table. House feels lighter without her shadow, she said softly. Pat didn't answer. She didn't need to. Later that week, Joan watched as her mother sat at the old desktop in the study, logged into her account, and clicked through the new options. Monthly, Pat said aloud, selecting the drop-down. Same day, every month. She typed in the amount, precise, generous, untouchable. Beneficiary, Franklin Futures Fund. Memo line, for the kids who age out with nothing but hope. Repeat until indefinite. She clicked submit. The confirmation pinged. Joan stood in the doorway, arms folded. That's the 4th account you've set up for giving, she said. Pat didn't turn. I'm not giving, she said. I'm investing in better strangers. Outside, the fall wind had picked up. Emma sat on the porch swing, watching the leaves skitter down the street like tiny, frightened secrets. She pulled her hoodie tighter, then reached into her pocket and opened the envelope Pat had left her weeks ago. Inside was a note, in Pat's unmistakable script. When the time comes, don't let the past decide your price. You're not for sale. Below that, a key. Small, heavy, not to a house, not to a car. To something locked, something waiting. She turned it over in her hand just as a car rolled slowly past the house. Same black SUV, same tinted windows. But this time, it didn't keep driving. It stopped. And someone stepped out. The call came on a Wednesday. Clear skies, no warning. Robert Henderson was in his office, the morning light cutting neat bars across the mahogany desk when his line blinked. He listened silently for 32 seconds, eyes narrowing just once before he spoke. That's her offer? He asked, voice low. Half? He didn't bother writing it down. You can tell her counsel this. Mrs. Sutton does not negotiate percentages of truth. Then he hung up. Pat was sitting in the garden room when he arrived. Her favorite space in the house, framed by glass and filled with the kind of morning light that made even wilted plants look dignified. A stack of seed catalogs sat beside her teacup. Robert placed his leather briefcase on the table, opened it, and laid out a single-page document. The words, Proposed Settlement Agreement, were typed neatly at the top. They're offering to repay half the appraised value, he said. In exchange, you drop the criminal complaint and agree not to pursue damages. Pat didn't reach for the paper. She didn't need to. Half honesty still equals none, she said. Robert gave a small nod. I told them as much. She sipped her tea, unhurried. Then we're finished. For now, he said. Detective Klein's report is finalized. It's going to the prosecutor tomorrow. They'll likely issue an arraignment date within a week. Pat leaned back. Good. Maybe then she'll finally learn how much her shortcuts cost. Robert studied her for a moment. You understand that this isn't about money anymore. Pat's eyes moved toward the window, where a small finch darted between the feeder and the maple tree. It stopped being about money the day she sold my wedding ring for pocket change. He closed his case quietly. Then we stay the course. Across town, Linda's lawyer sat in a conference room, voice tight. "She's refusing all negotiation," he said into the phone. "She'd rather see you in court than accept repayment." Linda pressed her palm against her forehead. "Then she's lost her mind." "She's methodical," he corrected. "Not emotional. I'd tread carefully." Linda hung up, throat dry. Her reflection in the microwave door looked older, smaller. She didn't look like a daughter anymore. She looked like someone still auditioning for the part. That afternoon, Emma pulled up in her old silver sedan. "Come on," she said through the open window. "You're coming with me." Pat hesitated on the porch. "Where?" "Anywhere that doesn't have subpoenas or screen time," Emma said, smiling. They drove to a cafe on High Street that had mismatched mugs and a chalkboard menu. No one there cared about last names or court dates. Emma ordered 2 lattes and a pecan muffin split down the middle. "You used to bring me here when I passed algebra," she said. "Said I earned sugar with strategy." Pat's smile warmed. Still true. For the first time in weeks, her laugh came freely, light and full, the sound of someone remembering how to breathe. Joan sat at a corner table, pretending to read the paper. She lifted her phone and, without saying a word, snapped a photo. Pat mid-laugh, Emma leaning close, 2 faces soft with relief. "Needed proof," Joan murmured to herself. "That piece actually looks good on them." Meanwhile, at the precinct, Detective Klein typed the final lines into her report. "Case file complete. Affidavits verified. Financial documentation consistent. Prosecutor notified." She clicked send and leaned back in her chair. Outside her office window, a storm was rolling in from the west, slow, gray, deliberate. When Emma and Pat stepped back into the afternoon light, the air had changed, cooler, heavier, that electric quiet before thunder. Pat took her granddaughter's arm as they walked to the car. "Feels like something's coming," she said. Emma smiled faintly. "Storms clear the air." They didn't notice the man standing by the newspaper box at the corner. He wasn't reading, just watching. As they drove away, he reached down, pulled a folded envelope from his coat, and read the top line one more time. To Mrs. Patricia Sutton, Office of the Franklin County Prosecutor. Then he slid it back into his pocket and stepped into the rain. It hit the morning news cycle before most people had finished their coffee. Local anchors spoke the words slowly, carefully, each syllable dipped in quiet disbelief. Franklin County Prosecutor's Office confirms a formal indictment has been issued in State v. Carpenter, alleging felony theft of property exceeding $5,000. The defendant, Linda Carpenter, age 46 of Bexley, was charged late Tuesday evening following an 8-week investigation. Sources say the evidence trail was unusually precise. The camera showed the courthouse steps, Detective Klein's silhouette in the distance, file in hand, lips pressed thin. By noon, the Franklin Courier headline went digital. Daughter indicted in estate fraud case. Retiree's meticulous record-keeping credited with unraveling scheme. At the accounting firm where Linda worked, the office manager called her into a small conference room with frosted glass walls and no warmth in his eyes. "HR's here," he said, not meeting her gaze. "You've been placed on administrative leave pending clarification." "Clarification of what?" she demanded. He slid a printed article across the table, her name in bold. Linda felt her chest go tight, like her ribs had shrunk. "This is slander," she hissed. "It's not even proven." "I hope that's true," he said softly. "But while the matter's active, the firm can't have you handling client accounts." "I'm sorry." He wasn't. "Not really?" She stood, snatched her purse, and left before they could offer pity disguised as protocol. The house was quiet when she got home. Too quiet. Tom's car wasn't in the driveway. His golf clubs were gone from the hallway closet. The framed wedding photo that had always hung by the entry table now left a pale rectangle on the wall. Ghost of a past she couldn't repaint. There was a manila envelope on the counter, propped against a bottle of aspirin. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. Separation filing. His neat handwriting across the top. "You'll always find a way to make loss look like theft." She sat at the kitchen island, staring at the envelope until the light changed. Afternoon bled to dusk, and she still hadn't moved. Across town, Pat knelt in her backyard, gloved hands deep in soil. October had turned the garden into muted fire, burnt orange marigolds, faded dahlias bowing under their own weight. She pressed a trowel into the earth, steady and methodical, not angry, not triumphant, just tending. Emma walked out carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "The news is everywhere," she said gently. "They even mentioned the scholarship fund." Pat brushed dirt from her gloves. "Then at least something good got airtime." Emma set 1 mug beside her. "You didn't ruin her, Grandma," she said. "She did." Pat didn't answer right away. She watched a squirrel dart along the fence line, quick and nervous. "I never wanted ruin," she said finally. "I wanted silence," and she kept breaking it. Emma crouched beside her, eyes soft. "You taught me that accountability isn't cruelty." Pat smiled faintly. "It's fertilizer," she said. "Smells awful, but things grow from it." That evening, Robert stopped by. He looked tired but pleased, his version of contentment. "Prosecutor's office called," he said, setting his briefcase down. "Press conferences are a mess, but the paperwork's impeccable. You'd be proud." "I already am," Pat said. Robert sat across from her, removed his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You know, I've been practicing law 28 years, he said. Seen plenty of vengeance dressed up as justice. But this?" He gestured toward the stack of case files on her counter. "This was arithmetic. Balanced, exact. No shouting, no spectacle. Just clean." Pat tilted her head. "You sound surprised?" He smiled faintly. "Paper cuts deeper than anger." Joan walked in from the hallway just in time to catch that line. "Put that on a mug," she said. Robert chuckled, stood, and gathered his things. "You'd sell out by Christmas." Later, after everyone had gone, Pat sat alone in the garden room again. The night pressed against the glass, heavy and black. She reached for her tea, then paused. Something about the window reflection caught her eye. Headlights. A car idling at the curb. Same SUV, same stillness. But this time, the driver's door opened. Someone stepped out, holding something in their hand, flat, square, glinting in the porch light. Pat rose slowly, the tea forgotten. And in the reflection, she saw it wasn't Linda. It was a man she hadn't seen in 30 years. The plaque was bronze, matte finished, no flourish. Just solid weight and clean lines, like the woman it was named for. It read, "The Patricia Henderson Education Fund for Youth Aging Out of Foster Care. Franklin and Licking Counties established with quiet hands, enduring vision, and relentless hope." Below it, in smaller print, "Integrity Compounds." The crowd stood still as the velvet cover dropped, and applause rolled through the old library hall. Some clapped politely. Others, those who knew the real story, clapped like they were releasing years of held breath. Pat stood beside the plaque, hands folded neatly, dressed in dark green. She looked at the thing like it had grown roots. To her left, Emma wiped the corner of her eye discreetly. Joan stood on the other side, arms crossed. Not from judgment, but pride so deep it had nowhere else to go. In the front row, 21 kids sat in borrowed dress clothes. High school seniors from group homes, transitional housing, and shelters. Each of them with a pamphlet in their lap. Each of them told, "Someone believed in you before you believed in yourself." Pat stepped up to the small wooden podium. No teleprompter, no script. Just a folded index card and a steady breath. Her voice, when it came, was clear. "I've been called a lot of things in my life. A wife, a mother, a numbers woman. But I never thought I'd be called a founder." A few quiet chuckles. She glanced down at the kids. "I never wore wealth well. I don't like diamonds. And I've never had the patience for yachts or wine that needs explaining. But I do believe in value, and I've learned real value isn't worn. It's passed forward." The room stilled. Pat looked out over the rows of strangers and not quite strangers, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the podium. "If you're sitting in this room wondering what you've been handed," she said softly, "the answer is not enough. And that's not your fault. But from this day forward, it won't be your future either." Applause broke before she could finish her sentence. Not loud, but full. A standing kind of silence followed, where reverence did more work than volume ever could. Pat stepped back. Emma was the first to reach her, arms around her tightly, face buried in her shoulder like she had when she was 8. and had skinned her knee on Pat's driveway. Joan wiped her eyes with the edge of a tissue, then leaned in. "You out-invested them all," she whispered. Pat smiled, still holding Emma, still absorbing the echo of the room. "I'm not done yet," she said. "Dividends take time." Outside, the afternoon light stretched long over the sidewalk. Robert stood beside his car, watching from a distance. He hadn't gone inside, didn't need to. He pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket, worn, creased, postmarked 2 weeks prior. The return address wasn't Linda's, but the signature inside was hers, a letter written in rage, sent to the prosecutor's office, full of revisionist threats and barbed desperation. He'd held it, unread, until today. Now he handed it over to Detective Klein. "Just in case," he said. "You may want it in the file." She scanned the signature at the bottom, then nodded. Paper trails cleaner than a confession. Robert watched the last few guests trickle out of the ceremony hall. He spotted Pat, flanked by Emma and Joan, walking slowly toward the parking lot, head high. He smiled, but just as he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. One new voicemail, unknown number. He played it. "You think it's over, but I know where the money went. I know what she really did." The voice wasn't Linda's. It was a man's, and he wasn't bluffing. Robert slid the final document across the table, its signature line still bare. The room was quiet, heavy with the sound of completion. Pat adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at the header. Irrevocable Charitable Trust Agreement. Final disbursement terms. She read every word, even though she'd read it all before. She always did. Her pen moved slowly, but with certainty. The ink dark and clean on the paper. Robert leaned back in his chair. "That's it," he said. "It's done." He tapped the second page gently. "The last of the residual estate. Cash, land parcel from Joe's pension, and securities. You've now transferred all of it to the Patricia Henderson Education Fund." Pat didn't nod. She didn't smile, but something subtle shifted in her jaw, like her bones had finally let go of something they'd been holding too long. "And Emma?" she asked. Robert handed over a second, thinner packet. "She's now officially named successor administrator, with full oversight powers should anything happen to you. Legally binding. Filed this morning with the county clerk." Pat took the paper and set it in front of her. Every number balanced now. Robert gave her a long, quiet look. "You did it your way. No noise. Just math." Joan, seated at the kitchen counter with her tea going cold, exhaled. "That's what peace looks like on paper." Pat reached over and touched her daughter's wrist. Not a gesture for comfort, just contact, just presence. "Then let's honor it properly," she said. "You two hungry?" That night, the kitchen table was set with quiet warmth. Cloth napkins, good silver, and one of Joe's old vinyls humming soft piano in the background. The roast had come out perfect, Emma's doing, and Joan had brought wine. The cheap red kind they all secretly preferred over the fancy stuff. They didn't toast. They didn't make speeches. But between bites of buttery carrots and soft bread, Pat caught herself watching the two women across from her and thinking not of absence, but of continuity. "This feels like something," Emma said, half laughing. "Like closing a book." Pat shook her head. "No, it's shelving the old one, so someone else can write in the margin." Joan raised her glass. "To margins, then." Emma clinked hers gently. "And to the woman who taught us when to draw lines." Outside, the wind had picked up, the maple trees rattling just slightly in the dark. Inside, nothing rattled. Earlier that afternoon, Robert had filed the full trust agreement in person at the county courthouse. Hard copy, signed and sealed, with 2 witnesses and a notary. The clerk had taken it with quiet reverence, the kind usually reserved for the end of things, not the beginning. But Robert hadn't stayed long. His phone had buzzed twice before he reached his car, both from the same unknown number. He hadn't listened to the voicemail again. He didn't need to. Instead, he printed a transcript and locked it in his private drawer. The voice on the recording wasn't just familiar, it was documented. From a deposition, from a pension board scandal, from 1992. The man who left that message wasn't just bluffing. He was connected. To Linda, to Joe, to a fund that no longer existed on paper, but had left fingerprints in the right or wrong ledgers. And Robert now had to decide what came next. He picked up the manila folder from his briefcase, labeled in his own neat writing, Sutton Contingency Ledger, 1988-1993, off record. He opened it, and inside, buried between expense statements and transfer slips, was a name. Not Linda, not Joe, Pat. And next to it, a signature that shouldn't have been there. Not in that year, not on that form. Robert stared at it, then reached for his burner phone. The final statement arrived by mail, not email. Pat had insisted. There was something ceremonial about paper, weight, ink, permanence. She slit the envelope with her letter opener, the old brass one Joe had kept on his desk since '82, and unfolded the tri-folded sheet with careful fingers. Henderson Wealth and Trust Statement, period. OCT 1, OCT 31. Patricia Henderson Education Fund Disbursement. Summary, $18,200. Tuition, housing, meal stipends. 4 students. 4 names, 4 lines, 4 futures. Pat read them all aloud. First name, last name, amount next to each. She didn't speak it like math. She spoke it like grace. Emma leaned over her shoulder at the kitchen table, eyes scanning the list. You said you wanted the fund to matter. Well, they're enrolling. These aren't just numbers anymore. I know, Pat said, folding the page back into thirds. That's why I wanted paper. Some things should be harder to delete. Emma smiled, then held up her tablet. You've got 6 letters to sign, 2 thank you notes, 3 intake forms, and 1 kid who calls you Miss P. Like she's not sure where the formality stops, Pat chuckled. Tell her it can stop at the check. Already did, Emma said. She moved to the desk where the correspondence tray sat, full but tidy. Pat's system was old school, but Emma had digitized just enough to keep it manageable. They worked in rhythm now, like a team. No friction, just flow. At exactly 4 p.m., a soft chime came from Pat's phone. ACH notice. Monthly restitution transfer received, $163.84. Routing, direct to Patricia Henderson Education Fund. The amount wasn't large, not yet, but the message always made her pause. Emma looked up. That her again? Pat nodded. Linda's wage garnishment. Emma didn't comment. She just went back to writing replies. But Pat saw the shift in her shoulders, how anger no longer lived there, only resolve. Later that evening, Joan came by with takeout and a smirk. She carried a paper bag of Indian food and a thermos full of herbal tea. Could have brought wine, she said, but figured we should toast in your style. She poured the tea into mismatched mugs, handed one to each of them, then raised hers like it was crystal. To compound interest, she said, in karma. Pat clinked her mug gently. I'll drink to that. They sat by the window, watching dusk paint the trees in silhouette. Pat reached down and turned the recovered velvet ring box in her palm. It opened with a faint snap. Inside, the pearl ring rested once more on its cushion, cleaned, reset, no longer pawned or pitied. She slid it onto her finger without a word. Emma noticed and gave her a quiet smile. That's the first time I've seen you wear it. Pat glanced down at the band. It's not a symbol anymore, she said. It's just history. Joan leaned back, sipping her tea. Looks good on you. Pat smiled. I lost gold, she said, but gained balance. They didn't need music, or candles, or milestones. The celebration was in the quiet, the calm, the clarity. In Robert's office, another envelope sat unopened, the transcript from the burner voicemail still in his drawer. He hadn't decided yet what to do with it. Maybe he never would, because sometimes secrets expired on their own, and sometimes they waited. But as far as Pat was concerned, the books were closed. Every decimal in its place, every inheritance spoken for. She walked to her desk that night with one last task in mind. She opened her journal, hard leather cover, gold-trimmed edges, and wrote the date at the top. Below it, she added one final line. My daughter sold my jewelry for spending money, so I came home, called the bank, and opened a new account with a new heir.